Hi guys, Mr. Hill here. We are moving on in our history from the Anglo-Saxons. We're going to move on looking at the Vikings. So the Anglo-Saxons were first. They split Britain up into all the different kingdoms, as we know, and then along came the Vikings. Now, question for you. What's the image you have in your head when you hear the word Viking? Just take a moment. What do you think a Viking looks like? Most of you, I'm guessing, would have come up with this image of the horns on their helmets, a big axe, and a shield. There's one fairly major problem with this image. They didn't have horns on their helmets. If you look at the way the horn is shaped, so it's a nice big curve all the way here back to the side of the helmet. The helmet's job is to protect your head and divert the blow of the sword or the axe away from the important things that are inside your head, otherwise known as your brain. So if you think a sword's going to hit the top, it's going to slide off and slide off. If you've got these hanging off your helmet, they're going to slide the sword in and they're going to cause you to have more damage. Also, if you're trying to sneak up on someone coming through a bush or a tree, guess what? Those horns are going to catch every branch and twig that's going, and you're going to end up hurting yourself or knocking your helmet off. It'll land on the ground with a great big clang and the element of surprise will on. So they didn't have horns on their helmets. Actually came from the 19th century where someone designed a set for a play. So there you go, you've learned something today. So you probably did not know that before we get started, much like Dopey there. So now we've got that big misconception out of the way straight away. Let's move on and find out some more about the Vikings. So the Viking Age in European history is from about 700 AD to 1100 AD. During this period, many Vikings left their homelands in Scandinavia and travelled in longboats to other countries like Britain and Ireland. When the people of Britain first saw the Viking longboats, they came down to the shore to welcome them. However, the Vikings fought the local people, stealing from churches and burning buildings to the ground. So can you imagine, you've gone down, these new people coming to trade with us. You go down onto the beach and off comes the boat, a horde of angry Vikings, and all they're interested in doing is having a fight with you and stealing all your riches. Not really a very friendly thing to do, is it? So our Viking friends. So the name Viking comes from a language called Old Norse, and it means a pirate raid. So people who went off raiding in ships were said to be going Viking. So that's how they got their name. So they travelled. They're well known for their seafaring abilities and their travelling. So like the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes, the Vikings came from northern Europe, but they travelled from the Scandinavian countries of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. So if you remember, the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes came from down here and a few from up here. We're going further north into Europe. It's colder and a little bit more miserable at times. So some of them came straight across the North Sea, certainly from Denmark, and settled in England. Sweden and Norway. So from Sweden, they travelled across the North Sea and settled up in the very north of Scotland. And coming from Norway, they went all the way around. They went the really long way around to find land and settled in Southern Ireland, what's now we know is the Republic of Ireland. They sailed in these amazing boats. And so the first Viking raid in Britain was 787 AD. Early raids were violent and aimed at stealing valuable items. So as we were talking about, people went down to the beaches, down to the shore to welcome the Vikings. New friends, well, let's meet them, let's greet them, let's make them feel welcome. And they jumped off the ship and stabbed you, which is really not good. So they were there to steal. They were violent. They were robbing, basically. So as we remember from Old Norse, it's just pirates. So monasteries were easy targets. So the reason for the monasteries being easy targets, full of gold, because the church was very rich at the time. Monks are not known for their ability to fight. They were quite often in religious studies. They were studying the Bible, looking for interpretations of the words of the Lord. Very similar to how an imam in the Muslim faith does it. So they look for interpretations, they read over it, they study it. So they're not practicing how to use a sword and how to keep themselves safe on a regular basis. So yeah, they were an easy target. But not all the Vikings were raiders. Many, like the Anglo-Saxons, were farmers, craftsmen, or traders. So they traveled all around Europe. They were great seafarers. They sailed across seas, trading for goods to buy silver, silk, spices, wine, jewelry, glass, and pottery to bring back to their homes. So you can see they've traveled quite a lot of Europe. They've left from Sweden and they've gone down through Russia towards Northern Africa. They've gone from Denmark down through Europe. They've around the outside of Europe. So they've gone round past Spain and they've ended up in Italy. They certainly came to Britain. They've gone from Norway to Iceland to Greenland to Newfoundland and further on. So if you went further on to the left of the map, you end up in America. And there's an argument that actually the Vikings were the first people to actually sail from Europe to America, not Christopher Columbus. So gradually, just like the Anglo-Saxons had done, the Vikings began to settle. By 874, they'd taken over much of Britain. So the red areas show where they built their towns and their villages. Of all the kingdoms, only King Alfred the Great of Wessex was able to beat the Viking army in battle. He allowed them to stay if they lived in peace. So if you remember, the Anglo-Saxons split Britain up into 6 or 7 different kingdoms. Danelaw, the big red lump in the middle of the country, was those kingdoms combined back together by the battle ability of the Vikings. So they were so good in battle, they managed to recombine all of this area of Britain back into one consolidated kingdom. So Wessex was strong enough to beat them, and they came to what's called a truce. So they had an agreement that if you live in peace, we'll leave you in peace and we'll get on with our own lives. So we've talked before about pull and push factors. These were very, very similar for the Vikings. The major pushing factors were a lack of space. And we've had this is a thing from before. This is one of the reasons for the Anglo-Saxons coming over. And the poor farming land. So they couldn't grow the crops they needed. They couldn't raise the animals they needed. Of the 3 countries the Vikings came from, Norway is covered in hills. Not very good for growing crops on. Sweden was covered in forests, so it takes a lot of work to cut down the trees, dig out the roots and the stumps of the trees, and get the land ready to grow. Denmark had a lot of sand, which doesn't lend itself to being able to grow lots of crops. So the good farming land of Britain was a big pulling factor. And we remember that from the Anglo-Saxons. Came from the Netherlands. They've come over because the land regularly flooded, so they couldn't grow anything. So they've brought the same ideas are coming through again. So, task. Our objective for today was, do I know where the Vikings came from and why they came to Britain? Can you answer that question now? And then, using your map drawing skills and your research skills, can you answer these 2 questions? Where did the Vikings come from? And why did they come to Britain? So why did they come originally? So think about that. And then why did they settle in England, in Britain? So you need to remember there were 3 countries and they were given one particular name for these 3 countries. So answering that first question, it's in the video. So you might want to rewind back a little bit and have a look. Use your map drawing skills. We've done a little bit of practice with this recently, and your research skills. So it's using Google to find the information or going back, watching this video really carefully, because I do answer the questions as I go through. Good luck, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing your work on tapestry when it's complete.